All right, we're going to talk about absolute value equations now. I've got the workbook page open to that. The thing with absolute value equations, we need to remember a few things before we start them. Remember, when we're talking about absolute value, we're talking about a distance. So when we had just regular numbers for absolute value, we looked at something like this. The absolute value of 5 would be equal to 5 because absolute value is a distance and it's the distance from 0 when we're talking about just regular numbers. So if I had the absolute value of -5, that would still be equal to 5 because it is still just 5 hops away from 0 on the number line. It doesn't matter that it's negative. Absolute values always come out to be a positive number unless you have a negative out front. So what we're going to do with these absolute value equations is we're going to have two things to happen. We're going to set the absolute value, we're going to take it out of absolute value, we're going to set it equal to the positive value of the equation, and then we're going to set it equal to the negative value of the equation. This is going to give us two equations to have to solve, and then we can go back and check our answers if we need to at the end. So if we've got something like 3x plus 2 equals 16, I don't really follow the steps that are over here on the left side. So I'm just going to write my two equations. I'm either going to have 3x minus 2 equal to 16, or 3x minus 2 could be equal to negative 16. Because you have to agree with me. If this inside of the absolute value was a positive 16, I would get the 16 that's on the right. If the number inside the absolute value worked out to be a negative 16, well, if I take the absolute value of negative 16, I'm still getting 16 on the right-hand side. So let's just solve each one of these. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides. So I'm going to get 3x equals 18. Divide each side by 3. So x equals 6. There's one of my possible answers. And so if I put 6 back in here, 6 times 3 would be 18. 18 minus 2 would be 16. The absolute value of 16 is 16. So that works. All right, so on this one, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add 2 to both sides, but I'm going to get something a little different on the right. So this time I've got 3x equals negative 14. We're going to divide both sides by 3. So my other answer is going to be negative 14 over 3. Two options because we have an absolute value. All right, so let's look at the next one. Now here's where the steps would probably come into play. When we are going to solve these absolute values, you need to isolate the absolute value. And what does that mean? That means that you need to get the absolute value part by itself on one side of the equation. So in this number 2, I do not have the absolute value part isolated. After you isolate it, you're going to set up your two equations, and we're going to solve those, just like we did in the first example. Now let's keep in mind a couple of things. When I isolate the absolute value, you can't have the absolute value equal to a negative number. So if something happens and I go to isolate my absolute value and I end up with a negative number equal to an absolute value, then I'm going to have to just say no solution, because you can't ever have an absolute value equal to a negative number, because remember, absolute value is a distance. So on this one, I don't have it isolated, so I need to move the 2 over first. So I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. So I'm going to get 2x minus 1 now equals 3. Now I can make my two equations. So I'm going to have 2x minus 1 equals positive 3, or 2x minus 1 equals negative 3. I'm going to add 1 to both sides for this one. So 2x equals 4. Divide by 2. So x equals 2. There's one answer. I'm going to go to the next equation, add 1 to both sides. So 2x equals negative 2. Divide by 2. So x equals negative 1. There's my second solution. So these aren't too bad so far. We're going to go over here to the next page, going to do the same thing. I already have that absolute value isolated. So on this one, all I have to do is go straight to my equations. 3 plus 1/4 x equals positive 4, or 3 plus 1/4 x equals negative 4. I'm going to clear my parentheses. My LCD is 4, so I'm going to take a 4 times each term. So I'm going to have 12 plus 4 goes into 12, 4 goes into 4. They cancel each other out, so I'm going to have an x equals 4 times 4 is 16. Now I'm going to subtract 12 from each side. So I get x equals 4. Okay, on this other one, I'm going to multiply everything. Again, I'm going to clear my fractions. So I'm going to multiply all the terms by 4. So I'm going to get 12 plus x equals negative 16 this time. I'm going to subtract my 12 from both sides. So x equals negative 28. There's my other answer. Okay, let's look at the next one. On the next one, I have a 1/2 in front of that absolute value. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clear that 1/2. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 2. The absolute value has not gone away yet. So x plus 1/4 equals 3 times 2 would be 6. Now set up your two equations. X plus 1/4 equals 6, or x plus 1/4 equals negative 6. I like clearing my fractions. You don't have to really clear your fractions on this one. You could subtract 1/4 from both sides. I'm just going to practice doing some clearing because I like to work with whole numbers. I think you do too. So I'm going to have 4x plus 1, because those 4's would cancel, equals 24. Subtract 1 from both sides. So 4x equals 23. So x equals 23 over 4 when I divide both sides by 4. On this one, let's just practice subtracting 1/4 from both sides on this one instead of clearing, because I think everyone needs practice of adding and subtracting fractions every so often. So I've got negative 6 over 1 minus 1/4. So I'm going to change that fraction to something over 4. So 1 times 4 is 4. Negative 6 times 4 is negative 24. So negative 24 minus another 1/4 would be negative 25 over 4. There's my two answers for that one. This next one has a lot going on. It's got that negative 7 over on the left side. It's got a negative 3 we're going to have to take care of. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 7 to both sides. I need to isolate the absolute value. So negative 3 times x minus 1/2 equals negative 13 plus 7 is going to be negative 6. Kind of a funky looking 6. There we go. Now I still want to isolate this absolute value, so I'm going to divide both sides by negative 3. Notice the absolute value has not gone away yet. I'm working on isolating it first. So x minus 1/2 equals 2. Now, we are going to solve, oops, sorry, I left out my absolute value. Absolute value of x minus 1/2 equals 2. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say, okay, x minus 1/2 equals 2, or x minus 1/2 equals negative 2. And then we are going to solve each one of those. And again, you have an option. You can choose to solve each one by clearing the fractions, or you can just add 1/2 to each side. Either one. Let's do this one. Let's just add 1/2 to each side. So I'm going to add 1/2. I'm going to add 1/2. Some of you are probably doing this on your calculator, which is fine. So 2 plus 1/2, that'd be 2/1. If I change that to an equivalent fraction, that's a 4/2. So 4/2 plus 1/2 gives me 5/2. There's one answer. Here I'm going to add 1/2 to each side. So this time I'm going to have negative 4/2 when I change negative 2/1 plus 1/2. That's going to give me negative 3/2. So there's my two answers for that one. Okay, let's look at the bottom of this page. I've got 8x plus 9 in absolute value plus 4 equals 2. So if we follow our same pattern, we need to isolate that absolute value. So I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. So I have absolute value of 8x plus 9 equals negative 2. Now, that's a problem. If you'll remember, about 5 minutes ago, I talked about how absolute values could not be set equal to negative numbers. So when I moved my 4 over, it caused that right-hand side to have a negative number. You can't have an absolute value equal to a negative number. So that means I have no solution. So watch out for those, because sometimes they'll just throw those in to just try and trick you. Okay, the last one I want to do is this one at the top of the page. I'm not really a fan of these. I don't give these a whole lot, but I'm going to do one, and if you look right above it, it tells you exactly how to work the problem. Okay, and so what it's saying is that if you have an absolute value set to equal to another absolute value, there should be an equal to. That's kind of not coming real good through on my page. I don't know if you can see it better than me, but that's an equal to in there. So if you have an absolute value equal to another absolute value, here's how you're going to set up your two equations. You're just going to take the absolute value away from each side and just set one side equal to the other. And then for your other equation, you're going to take away the absolute value of the left side. You're going to take away the absolute value of the right side, but you're going to put a minus in front of that parentheses. So you're going to be able to distribute a minus. So let's try that. Our first equation, we're going to take away the absolute values from each side, and then we're going to solve it for x. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. So I have negative x minus 5 equals 7. Add 5 to both sides. So negative x equals 12. I don't want a negative x though, I want a positive x. So divide both sides by negative 1. So x equals 12 divided by negative 1 would be negative 12. There's one answer. My other equation is going to be taking away the absolute value from the left side, but being sure you put a minus sign once you take the absolute value away from the right side. So I'm going to need to distribute that negative through there. So I'm going to have 2x minus 5 equals negative 3x minus 7. Now I'm going to add 3x to both sides. I'm going to have 5x minus 5 equals negative 7. Add 5 to both sides. So 5x equals negative 2, and then divide by 5. So my other answer is x equals negative 2/5. And that's how we're going to do absolute value equations. Be sure and email me if you have questions. Call me in my office if you have questions, but make sure you ask if you don't understand. Have a good day.